mix with the energy drink.
Is that?
I said it doesn't mix with the energy.
Oh, no. That's my sugar intake.
Oh, thank you.
You like mine too? I love it. My earrings. Here we go. Well, I don't wear diamonds.
It's not a diamond.
Diamonds are your girl's best
Oh,
friend.
it sparkles so beautifully, like it
Oh.
would be.
Yeah.
For how? You don't want any of your candy? Am I getting all this?
Means we must finish it.
Right.
Wow. You want some of this? Girls, come have some Publix's
They are,
Wednesday.
but nope. They won't eat it.
Thank you, Dr. Reppert. Start calling you Candyman.
Good movie.
You're welcome. It's a scary movie.
Thank you, Dr. Bryson.
Oh, Dr. Bryson gave you candy?
No.
I just rated his protein bars.
No dinner, huh? I forgot my readers. Does anybody have extra readers?
I don't.
Alright then, I'll just squint my way through the evening.
Join the meeting. That's a new option.
I think it's a bad thing.
You can just wait until you
It's just a new icon.
I found that.
A new icon. It makes it sound more exciting.
I have this when I was like 13.
Hey, show you. It looks pretty high. Sounded. Which one?
How are you?
Only one run off though.
Ignore.
Are you all ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you get the one?
You're on.
Oh, I think we're good. I'm good. Okay. I'd like to call to order our policy, Personnel and Policy Committee meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Thank you. And do we have anybody for public comment? No? All right. Then moving on to item 3.01, our first reading of board policies for the current policy cycle. So I just wanted to give a little introduction to our board policy review schedule and just a little bit of detail on that because as a newer board member, I know this was something that I needed to learn, so I wanted to share that. So as per our board policy review schedule, the policies discussed at this committee meeting were distributed at the January board meeting. Tonight, we will conduct the first reading as part of the policy adoption process and discuss any input from the board, stakeholders, or if we had public comment. We will then review them at the board meeting following this meeting and summarize any revisions that will be reflected in the second reading in March. I would like to provide a brief overview of the purpose of policies and how they are developed. School district policies guide the actions of the board, administration, staff, students, parents, and the public. Board policy focuses on what is supposed to happen in the schools regarding educational programs, student achievement, staff accountability, district finance, facilities, community relations, and then the organization of the school board itself. Effective boards govern through policy. They ensure issues will be addressed consistently throughout the district and provide administrators with a direction they can follow. To implement the policy, administration regulations known as ARs are developed by the administrative team and focus on how the policy will be enforced within the school district. The need for a policy to be revised or created is part of the board policy review process. A new or revised policy could be prompted by PDE enacting a law, a school board director request, a legal challenge where PSBA recommends a revision, or an administrative assessment that the policy needs to be updated or combined. At this point, I will go through the policies scheduled for review and ask for any feedback. On the first one, Policy 006 for meetings, this policy is being updated at the request of the board president to include the vice president and treasurer to cooperate in the agenda preparation with the board president and admin team to benefit from their knowledge and perspectives and ensure that the vice president is prepared to act in the absence of the president. This policy is also being amended to include an agenda item for board discussion following public comment. Does anybody have any questions or feedback on policy 006? Okay, moving on. Policy 137, the home education programs. This policy is not being amended, but adding ARs as attachments. And we actually have a few policies that are going through that, 137.1, 137.2, and 140.1. Dr. Reppert, could you just speak a little bit about the AR attachments and what that looks like?
Yes, Mrs. Hall, we're looking specifically at 137, what was previously in board docs. We did have the administrative reviews that were included, but for specifically policy 137 dealing with the home education programs, what were previously listed as the AR0 and the AR2 will now become attachments, which will be attachment 3 and attachment 4 for policy 137.
Okay,
Would you like me to move through the remainder of the 137s?
Sure.
Mrs. Hall?
yes.
We're looking at policy 137.1 regarding extracurricular participation of the home education students. One of the changes that we did make based on feedback is for homeschool students, homeschool education students, that they do have the ability, with the approval of this policy in March, that they will be able to attend after-school sponsored activities such as prom and dances. So this policy will now allow, this policy recommendation would now allow home education students to participate in those events. Going back to the administrative reviews under 137.1, we did have an administrative review AR0. That was now added as attachment 1 for this policy of 137.1. And the administrative review, which was AR1 for this policy, as Mrs. Hall had indicated, this one would be retired from what's currently in policy, but would then be utilized for the internal documentation and administrative direction based on that specific policy.
And then, just if anybody has any comments to that, you can let us know. I know that there is going to be a comment on 137.2.
Then regarding 137.2, the participation in co-curricular and academic courses by the home education students. There was an administrative review, which was 137.1 AR1. That will now be added as the attachment to this policy.
That's me.
And that's your
right.
cue, Jen.
So, yeah, I would actually like to recommend the following change to that, and that's that students are no longer required to participate in consecutive time periods, so as long as they meet the sign-in, sign-out guidelines. That way they'll be released into their guardian parent's care. It won't be a liability to the district, but that means they can attend first period and fifth period, not just first and second period.
And what I'll do is we will make the revision to this and then make sure the board gets a copy of what that revision would be for the approval then in March. Thank you, Mrs. Henkel.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go to 140?
Yes, finish
Okay.
it off.
When we look at policy 140.1, charter and cyber charter students, the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we're clear with is we're providing home education students the ability to attend school-sponsored after-school events such as dances and proms, that for our cyber charter students, to provide them that same opportunity to participate. So that was not a policy that we shared in January, but as we noted, as we were looking at that internally, that we wanted to make sure that that policy also has that same verbiage about those students having that opportunity. So then we'll be able to have that approved then in March.
Thank you. And thank you for finding that one to add in with the other home education policies and recognizing that there should be alignment between the two. Policy 200, enrollment in the district. There's two parts to this. PDE did make a policy change in August regarding free and appropriate education, what's known as FAPE, for the age to be until 22. It's currently 21. But at this time, PSBA is not recommending changing this policy, as no changes were made to the Pennsylvania School Code or the State Board of Education regulations regarding a change in age eligibility for students. The second piece, the piece that is being modified for enrollment in the district, is to amend the policy to include students experiencing educational instability and children of military families. Does anybody have any comments on that one? Did I catch everything, Dr. Reppert? Wonderful. All right. Policy 202, eligibility of non-resident students. This has been updated to reflect the recommendation from PSBA related to students experiencing educational instability and children of active duty military. And following along with that, Policy 217 for graduation requirements, again, being updated to reflect those recommendations about educational instability and children of active duty military, but also being updated to include the graduation requirement chart, which is currently in the handbook. Or the
It's currently in the curriculum guide.
Curriculum guide.
And will also be in the handbook that'll be presented to the board next month.
Okay, any questions on anything so far? All right, excellent. Policy 254, educational opportunity for military children. Again, this is sort of part of the other ones that we had where this is being updated to reflect recommendations from PSBA on military children. Policy 326, the complaint process for employees of the district. This policy is not being amended, but it's being merged with the policies that were currently housed in 300, 400, and 500. All of those sections were related to employees, and they just had different classifications, be it administration, professional, and support. And so again, the particular policy here, it's not being amended, but being merged just to reduce any redundancies. Policy 342, jury duty for employees of the district. This is, again, the same thing. The policy is being amended to be merged with the 300, 400, and 500. And I do want to share that this process was started in the spring of 2023, again, to eliminate redundancy. And so we're just moving forward with trying to combine that where we can. Policy 346, the injuries on school property for employees of the district. This policy is not being amended, but again, being merged. And 347, workers' compensation transitional return to work program for employees, same thing, it's being merged. And the last one under our category of merging is policy 332, working periods for employees of the district. This is again being merged. So for anything that was policy 326, 342, 346, 347, or 332, does anybody have any feedback or questions? All right, excellent. Moving on to policy 800, records management. This policy is being amended by a board member request, and the slight addition to this is the policy reads, the board shall retain as a permanent record of the district board minutes, and we're adding in any recorded videos of public board meetings, annual auditors' reports, and annual financial reports. All the other financial records, including financial account books, order bills, contracts, invoices, receipts, and purchase orders, shall be retained by the district for a period of not less than 6 years. So again, being amended slightly to include any recorded videos of public board meetings. Any questions on that?
I recall Mr. Litz had a concern that this could possibly be implied to create an obligation to preserve the ability to play those videos, even if the format's changed over time, 30 years from now, maybe, MPEG-4, whatever they're stored as, wouldn't play anymore. So we may want to consider adding some language that this does not create an obligation to ensure that the videos are playable on, if the technology with which they're recorded is obsolete.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. So that is policy 800. Policy 806, Dr. Reppert, I'm just going to introduce this, and if you could talk to us a little bit with the child abuse. So this policy is being updated to reflect, or maybe Sue, I'm not sure who helped me with this one, but this policy is being updated to reflect current requirements for the submission of child abuse clearance. Okay.
1 second.
Yep.
Still writing. So when looking at this policy, the regulations changed for child abuse clearances several years ago. Prior to the change in the law, once you were hired, you would get your clearances. At that point, you did not have to get clearances again. The law changed that you now have to get them a minimum of every 5 years. Our policy reflected language from the changeover period. So when that went into effect, there was a 2 to 3 year period where you had to be compliant with it to start forward again. So if you were an existing employee, so really when we looked at our policy, it wasn't reflective of the current law after the transition period. So we just changed it and modeled it to the PSBA policy for the 5-year requirement. You are required as a school employee to report any infractions that occur in between. So if it's not like if something happens on year 3, you're not required to report it. You are required to report anything that would occur.
Okay.
The other thing I will add is, as a district, even though the law says that we can take clearances up to 5 years old when hiring employees, our policy is that you must have a clearance that's within a year for all of your clearances upon hire.
Thank you. Policy 810, transportation. This policy is being updated per PSBA's recommendation related to board purchasing, equipping, and maintaining school buses. This policy is mandated to comply with state regulations. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Moving on to policy 815, the acceptable use of internet computers and network resources. This policy is also being updated per PSBA recommendation to maintain consistency and alignment with the E-rate requirements and court decisions. So that basically just means, because we work with the E-rate, that it's just being compliant with what they define as their guidance
Yes,
terms.
E-rate is a federal program, so
Right.
there are some federal requirements surrounding it.
Okay. All right. And the last one, policy 819, suicide awareness, prevention, and response. This policy is being updated, again, per PSBA's recommendation to address a correlation between threat assessment teams and crisis response intervention teams. Dr. Reppert, can you explain what that correlation is between the threat assessment teams and crisis response intervention teams?
Yes, absolutely. When we're looking at threat assessment teams, whenever there's a specific concern about a threat, whether it's related to a student, staff member, or the facility, there is a threat assessment team that includes myself, Officer Hanson, and then at each of the buildings, when we go to those, the administrator, could be school counselor, school psychologist is part of that, as well as any specific teachers that may have been involved, to identify whether the threat was transient, whether it was something that the student said, but there was no substance behind it, or as a substantive where there is something, where a student may have had a plan behind that. And then when we look at the crisis response and intervention teams, those are specific to the buildings, how we're addressing those areas. Now, more specifically, our district, going back to last summer, we had our school counselors, social workers, school psychologists, and many administrators, as well as some of our agencies that we partner with, Pennsylvania Comprehensive Behavioral Health, True North, participated in what we call the flight crisis training, where we looked at how our district would respond to crisis. And when you look specifically at this policy, it's related, specific to suicide. So we currently have enabled a district-wide flight team that, in the event that there is an event at a specific school, that flight team would go in and provide what we call a safe room for those students, that they could enter in and work through some of the challenges that they may have based on that event or that crisis. And that then allows that building, the school counselors, the social worker, the administrators, to then focus on their building. So the flight team, which would include our school social workers, school psychologists, Ms. Platts, myself, as well as some of the agencies that I spoke of, Pennsylvania Comprehensive Behavioral Health, True North, as well as the Employee Assistance Program, the EAP, they would be part of that safe room to provide any of those individuals, whether it's students and/or staff, to support, but allows then the building to continue their functioning as is, but then also maybe support some of those students, maybe between classes that are not going into that safe room. One other thing, Mrs. Hall, I do want to point out, in the previous policy, it indicated that our staff needed to participate in 4 hours of suicide awareness training every 5 years. Now, based on PDE's mandates, it's 1 hour every year. So we did make a change in this policy, so it's every year all of our staff will participate in 1 hour suicide awareness training.
Okay, thank you. And just to put the punctuation on this one, we're going to retire our SYC SD version, and we're going to adopt the PSBA version. Any questions on anything? Okay. Sue, did I miss anything? Okay, wonderful. All right, well, if there is nothing else, then do we have any new business? I have no new business, so we can go to adjournment. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Very thorough report.